The story of preserving the historic buildings in downtown Georgetown and the revitalization of the square predates the start of the Main Street program in 1982. There were key residents who played an important role going back to the 1970s. The Land of Good Water was a book published by Clara Scarborough in 1973, and it was an award-winning history of Georgetown, which helped to create an appreciation for our unique story. After the book was published, she visited many service groups and community groups, increasing an interest in preserving our past and our historic buildings. The Main Street that you see today is not what it was 40 years ago. And what you saw at that point in time was the deterioration of our downtown. The buildings were mostly vacant, the second stories were boarded up, and there had just been a lack of interest from people in downtown because a lot of the businesses had moved out, and there was more interest in shopping at the new shopping malls in Austin than there was to come back downtown, where there were these historic buildings and stores had, gone away from that central area. The Georgetown Heritage Society, now known as Preservation Georgetown, was formed in the 1970s. It included many residents who were preservation leaders, including Eugenia Harrell and Joanne King, who also served as the first woman on the Georgetown City Council. With the celebration of America's bicentennial in 1976, Genevieve Atkin was the chair of the Bicentennial Committee that organized a 3-day event here in Georgetown. Joan Morse and Lynn Storm Burnett also helped to coordinate that event. The designation of the Courthouse Square as a National Register Historic District in 1977 was another important milestone. And so as part of the effort to revitalize historic downtowns as part of the nation's bicentennial celebration, the National Trust for Historic Preservation worked on a pilot program, and it was called the Main Street Project. As part of the Main Street Project, there were 5 states selected to pilot this, and within those states, there were 5 communities selected. This was in 1981. Georgetown had applied during that time, and unfortunately was not selected. But through the efforts and support of the community, they reapplied the following year and they were selected. As part of that, that was an initiative from City Manager Leo Wood and the city's first planner, Renee Hansen, and they worked with community organizations to garner that support and really see Georgetown through that application process. And then once Georgetown was selected, they hired the city's first Main Street project manager, and that was Linda McCullough.
Well, that was a really exciting time for me. I hadn't been out of school for very long, and I was thrilled to be the person chosen to come to Georgetown and work with our Main Street project. As a preservationist, the first time I saw the courthouse square here, I was really impressed with the quality of what Georgetown had. A largely intact core commercial district with a great collection of turn-of-the-century buildings. And then when I began the Main Street project here, the first thing that happened was a lot of meeting people. The city manager took me around to meet downtown building and business owners. There were a lot of people who had been involved in the process of getting Georgetown selected as a Main Street city. We had a broad spectrum of projects here. We had small projects that were simply cleaning up and repainting facades. We had facades that had some missing architectural elements or some structural problems that needed to be addressed. So that was a step up. That was a little more involved project. But then we had a number of really large projects in downtown Georgetown, like the Lockett Building where we're sitting today. And this was a great example. This was, historic photographs show us that this was an early building. And then in 1896, M.B. Lockett, who owned the building at that time and operated a dry goods store in here, did a major renovation. He remodeled the front facade and brought in a Mesker Brothers storefront, pressed metal storefront, which at that time was state of the art. Then over the next several decades, up until the 1980s, the building gradually deteriorated. The second floor was abandoned. Windows were boarded up. The beautiful Oriel window that is a landmark feature on this building, rather than being repaired, it was truncated and didn't look very attractive. And probably one of the worst things that happened to this building was at some point, probably in the 60s or 70s, the original storefront was replaced with an aluminum and glass storefront. So at the start of our Main Street project, you could look at this building and see that it had architectural significance, but it didn't look very good. But right before our Main Street project began, the building changed hands, and the group of investors that bought this building were committed to restoring the beauty of the building, but also developing it. So they opened up the second floor, created first-class office space there. At great expense, they recreated the curved sashes and restored the Oriel window. And also significant to what we were doing, they looked at the commercial mix downtown, saw the need for a restaurant, and went about the business of recruiting a restaurant for this space. And they caught the attention of a successful Austin group who committed to opening the Cafe on the Square in downtown Georgetown. So the Lockett building really represents kind of the full spectrum of what we were trying to do downtown. And I think it speaks well to the very definition of what a Main Street project is, and that's economic development within the context of historic preservation. The year before our Main Street project officially began in Georgetown, the Weir family, a longtime Georgetown ranching family, bought a key property on a corner of the square. And they began on their own just working on this building, taking off inappropriate modernizations and restoring the old Macomson Hotel building to its original appearance at the turn of the century. And that spoke volumes to the community, because here was a longtime local family saying, we see potential here and we're going to invest our money in our downtown. Then a year later, the Main Street project officially began, and other building owners joined in. A few doors down from the Lockett building on the west side of the square is a building historically known as the David Love building. And the Harrell family bought that building and undertook another major renovation. Eugenia Harrell was the president of Preservation Georgetown. It was known in those days as the Georgetown Heritage Society. And it was a very active organization that had a big impact on the community. But Eugenia and her husband bought that building. It was just as derelict as the Lockett building was. The second floor windows were completely boarded up. The ground floor had a hardware store in it, but the building itself had not been touched for years. And they went to work on that building. The hardware store owner had purchased a building around the corner, and he was working on retrofitting that building that had been a car dealership for the hardware store. The Harrells went to work on their building, creating prime retail space downstairs, and then upstairs, creating an office for themselves in part of the building, but converting the other part of the second floor to an apartment. We had these large-scale projects beginning to happen around the downtown. We had a lot of smaller things happening in between, but it was all happening at the same time. Along the way, the city recognized that there might be pressure to develop our downtown area in ways that may or may not be conducive to preserving the integrity of what we have here. And the city hired a nationally known consultant, developed a downtown master plan, and adopted that master plan along with a set of guidelines about what is appropriate and not appropriate to infill or do with our downtown area. And that kind of thing can be and has been a little controversial at times. Not every property owner likes the idea of being told what they can and can't do with their property. But here's the deal. Think about places that have a unique character, a unique sense of time and place that draw people in. Santa Fe, Galveston, Fredericksburg. These places didn't just happen. They were preserved and have been developed in ways that preserve the authenticity and the historic integrity of what they have. And that's what we've done in Georgetown. From the very beginning, we made sure that there was a review process that was reflective of best preservation practices for what we've developed here. And the results speak for themselves. In the first 2 years of our Main Street project, we had over $10 million in private sector money reinvested in our downtown buildings. And at that time, the population of Georgetown was 15,000. So that was a really big deal. And what happened as a result of it, all of this downtown activity, all of the bricks and mortar projects that we had really caught the attention of the community. And Georgetown fell in love with its downtown. And beyond that, all of this activity caught the attention of state and national media. One of the important components of launching a Main Street project and getting the ball rolling with downtown revitalization is getting people excited about what you have downtown. So creating events that bring people into the downtown to experience firsthand the beauty and the wonder of it is really important. And we came up with this idea of a spring festival that we called Mayfair on the Square. We had a maypole, and we had a cakewalk, and we had a few vendors, and we invited every civic organization in town to come up with something they could do downtown that would bring people downtown. So the dance school had their students perform on the square. The drama department from Southwestern University did something on the square. And I look at the photographs of what we did that day, that first Mayfair. It took so much work. We hadn't done it before. Everybody was working so hard to make it happen. And it was a huge success, but it was very much a homegrown, small-town event. And what Mayfair on the Square became, ultimately, was the Red Poppy Festival.
It is just really grown into this huge event for the community, and the businesses especially love it because we see tens of thousands of people come down for that weekend, and it creates that renewed interest in downtown, bringing people in to shop. Maybe they haven't been into one of the stores in a while or ever, and it's just great exposure. So they really love the Red Poppy Festival. It is a major economic driver for our businesses. They receive a lot of positive residual effects from that event. The first Christmas stroll in 1981 was started by Esther Weir and her daughter, Laura Weir Clark, who was also an architectural designer. And Clark would go on to lead renovations in the 1980s on the historic Masonic Lodge and the Macomb Steel Weir building. We have added on additional events throughout the years. We also put on the Georgetown Swirl, which is our primary fundraiser for the Main Street Facade and Sign Grant Program. That particular event brings in the Texas wineries, local restaurants, and encourages shopping one evening downtown. And it was also a key component to helping us in attracting the wineries to Georgetown as part of that winery initiative. One of the primary drivers of the winery initiative was the Main Street manager at the time, Shelley Hargrove. And Shelley is actually still the longest serving Main Street manager in Georgetown. She was really instrumental in being able to assemble a team to go out and look at wineries in California and in Fredericksburg and be able to start the recruitment efforts for Georgetown.
So 2008, the Winery initiative started, and the great thing was that I had a very creative boss who was the economic development director at the time, Mark Thomas, and he had a good relationship with the Chamber of Commerce. And so that was a partnership that was started about trying to make Georgetown fully wet, because at the time, all of our restaurants had to do a membership to drink. And so we knew that, if restaurants really wanted to make a great profit and we were really going to change the dynamics of downtown, we needed to be fully wet. And so with that partnership with the chamber, and they took the lead, that election happened, and it really changed a lot. I mean, I think that was a huge turning point for downtown. There were a couple of really key anchor buildings that were kind of my target buildings that I thought, if I can get any change in a couple of these corner buildings, then I'm gonna feel like I've accomplished something. And so the Dimmitt building on the corner, it was just kind of those little baby steps that got people to kind of domino and snowball. We had a really strong board, and one of the members on our board was the first Main Street director in Georgetown, Linda McCullough, and Christmas, of course, can make or break small businesses. And so we had talked about, do we want to be like the Christmas capital of Texas, and other towns in Texas had kind of taken over that role, but we thought in Central Texas it would be great if we would do a better job of really promoting Christmas. And so at the time, we had really limited funds, and Linda McCullough took initiative because of her great design. She took the initiative and went to City Council and asked them to fund really professional Christmas lights, hiring a professional company to come in and wrap all the corner trees. We had already had, our buildings outlined, but we really wanted to kind of take it to the next level also. When we brought in that first year of lighting up all the trees and mini lights, it made downtown so magical, and I think people were so inspired that then they started taking their own business to the next level, and it just exploded, honestly. I think Georgetown is already one of those communities that is big on family, and Christmas was one of those occasions where people grasped it and just took hold, and it just kept growing and growing to the point where we're like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have to shut down the streets. It's getting so busy at the lighting of the square, and the day after Thanksgiving and Small Business Saturday, it just kind of took off. I have traveled all over the state of Texas and seen several downtowns, and Georgetown, without exception, has probably the best leadership. And I don't mean necessarily from the government standpoint, even though we do have great leaders, but from the citizens. Leadership can make or break a downtown, period. If you have someone who is a leader, they can get things done when others say it just can't be done. That's why Georgetown, I think, is still the poster child for Main Street, is because of the leadership, for sure. And that people who started decades ago are still here, and they're still contributing, and they're still, fighting for, the heart of the community, which I think, no matter how big Georgetown gets, I think this will always be the heart of the community, and it should be. And like Mayor Nealon said, the living room of Georgetown is downtown, and so I just hope that continues, but I bet it will. I mean, the leadership probably won't ever. They're too invested, and it's too close to them. They're very emotional about downtown, and so they should be. There's a lot of great memories here, so I think that's what I applaud Georgetown for.
One of the key leaders from the city manager's office was Assistant City Manager Lori Brewer, and she was really instrumental in helping drive a lot of special projects forward in the downtown.
So my background is finance, but moved in 2012 into the city manager's office, and some of the first areas of responsibility were implementing downtown projects. So we had, a downtown master plan that was the vision for what our downtown was going to look like. There were different retail studies, and so there were economic development strategies going on, but there wasn't a really clear ownership of some of the downtown projects, and that's primarily, I think, because it was going to take several city departments working together to get those done. One of the first ones that the city manager assigned me was a sidewalk expansion project that had some conceptual drawings. It was expanding the sidewalk on Austin Avenue between 7th and 8th Street. So, today that houses Mesquite Creek and a winery and various retail shops. But I think it's interesting today that people who are newer to Georgetown probably can't imagine that project or that sidewalk was ever any other way than the way that it is today. But I think that opened up that side of downtown for some new and unique businesses that really contribute to the overall fabric of our downtown. I think that one was very instrumental in sort of shifting from more of a retail kind of centered downtown to more the entertainment, food and drink and entertainment venues that we have today. At the same time, we were working on moving our fire department administration was in the historic fire station on Main Street. So it's just offices, but they were moving out to the new public safety building. The Economic Development Department was working with the city manager's office to sell the bays that were associated with the fire station, which had just been being used for storage. And so there were a number of proposals. Ultimately, the city council chose to go with Thundercloud, who had proposed, the sandwich shop and then a brew pub kind of concept in those bays. So as we were working through the details of that real estate, we realized we had a huge opportunity with the sidewalk and the driveway that existed for the bays. And so we designed a sidewalk expansion that would support the Thundercloud, as well as the reuse of the fire station offices, so the fire station itself. At the time, there was the downtown master plan had called for an art center that was very well supported. However, the location had not yet been determined. Eric Lashley, who was the library director and had a huge interest in the arts and connections in the arts community, had the idea that perhaps, given the size of the space, that we could get some support for a pilot project to determine feasibility and kind of work through maybe some of the operational issues that we might encounter in a new endeavor by doing a much smaller venue. So given my budget background, I knew of some different pots of money that were specifically dedicated towards arts There was one dedicated towards downtown development that was in the tax increment reinvestment zone money. And then some parks money that was dedicated to a specific zone that included downtown. So we put a lot of those funding sources together to come up with a renovation budget and work on renovating the old fire station to become an arts center. So I think the Arts Center was one of those projects that really changed the fabric of downtown. I think that there are a lot of things that contributed to this being the right timing for people to make their investment in downtown. But I do think the city showing it was willing to invest in some of these smaller projects, I do think is a good faith effort, showing the businesses that the city's here to be a partner with you, and then you're seeing it just in terms of the investment that's coming from the private side.
I think one of the beauties of Main Street is the partnerships that take place when you have so many people interested in the good work happening in downtown. You have city staff that is playing a role, but you also have those private developers, the private business owners, and it just all comes together in a way that really works. And I think that partnership element is something that cannot be emphasized enough with Main Street work.
From the very beginning, this was an economic development program. And I think that it still is. If the economy is not good downtown, then downtown is not going to thrive. But I think it's important that we continue to be thoughtful and intentional about the way development occurs downtown to ensure that the quality of what so many people have worked so hard to create doesn't get lost. I love to say this, and I think it's true. I think that the Main Street project was the right idea in the right place at the right time.
When you look back over the last 40 years and you're able to see how far our community has come, a lot of people don't realize that this is very much a grassroots type of effort. We do have a state designation for Main Street and we're part of a national program, but a lot of what happens in these Main Street communities is very community driven, and that's by the private sector coming in and reinvesting in downtown buildings through restoration work and opening up great businesses, whether that's a really great shop or restaurant. And then the public, that sector is responsible for kind of helping to bring it all together, making those investments in our sidewalks, our streets, some of the amenities so that all really works well. And I think that has been a real key for Georgetown being so successful, is everybody is working towards the same goal, and it's something that's just really made our community so special.